Takes you on to item 9.7. This is a motion by Councillor Rust on collaboration with local communities. We have a coalition amendment, a Green amendment, and a Liberal Democrat addendum.
Councillor Rust, to propose your motion.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I absolutely believe that local people should be properly consulted and listened to about local schemes. That was the First Minister's response last Thursday to an Edinburgh MSP questioning the sweeping changes being imposed on the communities of East Craigs and Craigmount. It is very difficult to present a convincing case and get people on board if a sizable chunk of the public believe that the changes will be imposed come what may. That was a predecessor of Councillor McVeigh as SNP Group Leader Steve Cardowney on 9 September. I am genuinely shocked that there are people in the Council that would seek to make such sweeping changes to transport infrastructure in the city without consultation and with so little transparency. Such behaviour harms the reputation of the Council and local government in general, something we could really do without. That was from a resident, but reflective of the countless emails and calls which have been received by local representatives. We've heard concerns from small businesses, from residents about congestion, and we'll see the officers' results, but concerns about pollution and the detrimental impact on local communities and the lives of residents. Measures which are from much real feedback negatively impacting on public transport and emergency services and causing reported issues for pupils and staff going to schools. As a result, there is widespread opposition in communities to many aspects of the measures being brought forward by this Council as detailed in my motion. People and community councils feel ignored, and I'm very pleased to have the support of Fairmill Head community in bringing forward this motion. By the Council's own figures from its limited public engagement, over 70% of comments objected to the Comiston Road scheme, yet the usual outcome. We note the comments, but will implement anyway. What a democratic outrage. It seems that the Council has not thought through the practical reality or consequences of its recent measures and is paying lip service to local residents. Well, apart from the one person or organisation which requested the hugely unpopular closure of Braid Road. It's worth noting that the Common Space portal was inherently biased, as it was not possible to enter a comment that objected to a proposal or to do anything other than agree to a comment. As an exercise in collecting local opinion in an accurate and democratic way, this was extremely sloppy. The determination to plough on with floating bus stops, despite an objection from RNIB Scotland, which pointed out the unacceptable risk these stops pose, the failure to meet residents in Buxton, despite repeated requests in advance of work starting, the absence of road safety audits and the refusal to listen to the overwhelming number of residents means a change of approach is required. I want to be quite clear in moving this. Of course we accept there requires to be safe and sustainable alternatives to travelling by car, or private cars as the Greens would say, especially when our public transport system has been under such strain due to COVID-19. However, proper collaboration with local communities will, as the motion states, impact on the Spaces for People programme in a positive way, building support for active travel that is likely to endure and ensuring schemes are transparent and of public validity. The UK Government Transport Secretary has stated to council leaders in England, where some councils have abused the cash, my message is clear. Speak to local residents, get it fixed or no more cash. Local authorities elsewhere have listened. Should Edinburgh not start properly consulting and engaging with local residents who the council is meant to serve, or does it need the intervention of Scottish Government? If you say that someone did something regardless, you mean that they did it even though there were problems or factors that could have stopped them, or perhaps should have stopped them. I think this council is doing things regardless to our communities, and it is unacceptable. The erosion of democracy has to stop. We need far better consultation and engagement, and we need to enable that and listen. The choice today, Lord Provost, is between a motion which agrees that change is best delivered through collaboration with local communities, which are impacted by decisions taken, or an administration amendment, which, and I do not jest, will reiterate the SNP Labour administration's approach to communities in Edinburgh. I move the Conservative motion.
Thank you, Councillor Rust. And to second the motion?
It's myself, Lord Provost. Councillor Webber.
Yes, you go, Councillor Webber.
Thank you. So Councillor Rust spoke very eloquently and in great depth about all the local challenges and issues that have been very clearly laid out in the press and social media lately, and the sheer scale and force of the many community voices and stakeholder groups now demanding to be heard must surely have gained the attention of the policy and decision makers within the Council when it comes to the expansive nature of the citywide Spaces for People schemes. From the methodologies and consultation process that have been followed, so far we can't be in any doubt that the only comments that resonate and align with their plans, those are the only ones that are listened to. Any other comment or feedback or any opposition to the schemes through the consultation process as stands is widely disregarded and ignored. So these voices that we're hearing so loudly now cannot be described as isolated. These dissenting voices are citywide, and it does also seem that they are cross-party, with the Lib Dems and Labour MPs and MSPs joining the calls of the Edinburgh Conservatives, who, can I remind those, either with a short-term memory or for those tuning in to this wonderful webcast for the first time, it was our 5-strong team on the Policy and Sustainability Committee on the 17th of May were the only party that wanted these schemes to go to committee for proper scrutiny and debate. And it seems now, with hindsight, that these dissenting voices are agreeing with us too. It is clear now of the invaluable contribution that local knowledge could have played in the development and the design of schemes, and indeed even in those to be selected to take forward to actual implementation. Having the opportunity in public to scrutinise, challenge and validate the schemes would have surely identified many of the serious issues and failures of the current plans that we are ploughing on with to the implementation stage, despite all the alarm bells going off. The reputational risk to the Council appears to be of no consequence to the administration, and neither does the very immediate risk we are placing those with accessibility or mobility issues with our floating bus stops and mind-boggling displayed parking spaces. And all of this is even before we consider the damage to the very local businesses the schemes are purporting to support, when we actually appear to be accelerating their demise. And with that, I support and second our amendment. Motion.
Motion, absolutely correct, Councillor Webber. To move the amendment by the Coalition, Councillor McInnes.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Nobody in this chamber says that we shouldn't be consulting with local communities. It is absolutely clear that we have attempted right throughout this administration to have in-depth consultation on a number of transport-related policies. No question at all about it. But what the Tory motion brings, and what some of the rhetoric that surrounds it completely ignores, is the fact that we're still in a pandemic response stage. And we have agreed as a council early on in this process about exactly what process we would follow as a council. And that included consultation with key stakeholder groups such as emergency services, such as local access panel, all of those people who could advise and look at the plans that we're bringing forward. It also included ward councillors and community councils, all of whom are able to represent the views of their constituents. There is a need for timely intervention. The most recent headlines are already beginning to look at the possibility of a Lothians lockdown again of some nature, some kind of Lothian response. We have to, as an administration, have a sense of responsibility towards the speed with which we introduce measures to help combat the impact of that and combat the ongoing impact of the pandemic in general terms. We don't have the luxury of time. And as a result of which, we set out that early process, which was agreed by this council, where there is feedback mechanism that is possible, where we have already seen many of the schemes be amended as we've gone through it. Morningside Road, for example, changes in all sorts of aspects of that design in order to accommodate the needs of local businesses. The same thing can be said elsewhere. We have made all sorts of amendments to proposed schemes to reflect better the voices that we have heard. Now, when it comes to my own amendment, it's quite clear to me that what we need to do is to remind people, including opposition councillors, about that need for acceptance of a previously agreed process, to make the best possible efforts around it, to reiterate to people what the objectives of the Spaces for People initiative are, and indeed to reflect on the guidance that we've had from the Scottish Government right from the very beginning, when we actually were told there was no requirement for any consultation. And instead, what we have done is undertake a period of consultation with those key stakeholder groups where we have then responded and made changes. It is very, very important to understand that we are trying to do the best possible thing for this city. And instead of which we have been accused time and time again that we are not listening, that we're not attempting to do the right thing, that we're trying to ignore communities, etc. Why else would I be bringing back a report to Transport and Environment Committee that looks at answering all of the key issues that have been raised by the community within East Craigs? That indicates a clear demonstration by this administration of a willingness to change proposals to suit the needs of local communities. Local communities, however, are part of a strategic transport network, a strategic transport environment across this whole city. And as an administration, we have a responsibility to look not only at the jigsaw pieces of individual projects within this initiative, but to see how well they all work together. I think, unfortunately, what I have seen from the very beginning in terms of the Spaces for People initiative is an attempt by opposition councillors to stir up opposition to these means, to delay, to obfuscate. And unfortunately, it means that we're not getting the kind of useful discussions that might be in place at this particular point. That's why I have asked for this report to come back so we can have a further discussion at Transport and Environment Committee when it's reconstituted, and we will have a chance to play out these issues again and to restate where we are as a council administration on that. We have a responsibility to ensure that the decisions that are made through the Spaces for People are put in place quickly, where we try and we modify. We accept that there will be changes that will be required. We accept that this is a different way from normal. But any attempt to impose the normal levels of public consultation will result in delay. And I think that's an enormous responsibility for this council. And I think we should take that into account as we go through it. So quite clearly, there is some degree of common ground between the amendment that I brought forward and the Green amendment as well. They complement each other very well. I would be very happy to combine those two. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McInnes. And I'm getting feedback, so if we can just check everybody's muted again. To second the amendment by the Coalition, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'll be supporting the amendment by the Coalition. Point 1 of Councillor Russ's motion mentions that he has concerns about the Council taking emergency measures. I think the clue is in the name, Lord Provost, emergency. Yes, we are taking emergency action in response to a pandemic. We are responsible for the safety of every resident in Edinburgh to ensure that they can travel around their community in safety, use our local shops, go to work and travel to school safely. He goes on to mention opposition. Indeed, there has been opposition. But I'm curious, is he telling me that no one in Edinburgh supports these measures, or any of my colleagues picking and choosing which constituents they want to listen to? I have definitely a very different mailbag from you. And then we are told about collaboration. So asking local councillors, emergency services, RNIB, spokes, community councils, Lothian buses, the access panel and various local meetings is not collaboration. I have, along with Councillor Day in the last couple of weeks, met with Living Street, Spokes, Guide Dogs, RNIB and various other organisations to discuss their feelings on these, but that's not collaboration. I would certainly like to know what papers my colleague has had that I have not read, which says forcing long-term changes on communities is our plan. This is a clear misinterpretation of the whole Spaces for People programme. Transparency. All I can repeat is I have, along with the convener, said that we are open to speak to anyone within the community or businesses and have indeed done so. Officers have attended meetings, we have walked around areas, the on-the-ground plans are passed on to everyone at the beginning of the process. As we have said time and time again, Council voted for Spaces for People in May. That's called democracy. We have listened and changed and tweaked when issues have been raised. We have said that we are taking the matter to the Transport Committee to enable a conversation and have that discussion, giving every political party a chance to raise their views. I am more than happy to meet with my colleague, where he could perhaps let me know where he thinks we are not being transparent. Thank you.
You're muted, Lord Provost.
Thank you. I think I should just stay that way, it's easier. To move the Green Amendment, Councillor Claire Miller.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Oh, the mute button. That's the bane of our lives these days, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for bringing me in to propose the Green Amendment. I just want to reflect, please. Today, at the First Minister's daily briefing, she reported to us that there were 290 new confirmed cases of COVID in Scotland since yesterday. And last night, there were 5 people in Scotland who were in intensive care, and there were 52 other people who were in hospital in Scotland. In this country, since the start of the outbreak, 2,501 people have died who tested positive for COVID. And 4,236 deaths have been registered in Scotland where COVID was mentioned on the death certificate. And I want to pause and remind Council today of these numbers, because perhaps during the 6 months that we've been in the thick of this, and we still are, because here I am at home, maybe somehow hearing these daily briefings and the figures has somehow softened their impact. It hasn't for me. 4,236 COVID-related deaths in Scotland. And that's just 6 months that we've been in this. So as a result, residents have been asked to change the way they behave, and they've been asked to change the way they travel. We're asking people to walk, wheel and cycle when they make necessary journeys. That means that we, as the Council, have to make it safe and easy for people to follow that advice. And we can't change everything instantly, but what we can do is prioritise measures that will enable people to do what they're being asked to do. Therefore, I think it's important to focus on paragraph 4 of my amendment to Councillor Rust's motion. I take a different approach than Councillor Rust in responding to this public health crisis. I'd like to emphasise my thanks to our residents who've engaged in good faith to provide their local knowledge about the areas in which they live and know very well, so that the Council can improve and adjust the measures that have been implemented in their streets. We've got a duty to provide the safe space that people require, so that they can leave their car at home and instead travel by walking, wheeling and cycling when they make those necessary journeys. We're not out of this pandemic yet. It's important that public health and the safety of people moving on our streets is our priority. And with that, I move the Green Group amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. And to second the Green Amendment?
Formally, Lord Provost. Apologies for the delay.
Okay, no problem at all. Thank you very much. To move the addendum by the Liberal Democrat Group, Councillor Lang?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Provost. And before getting into the details, I do want to be clear that Liberal Democrats think the Spaces for People programme has delivered really important and some very welcome changes. I think that's been particularly the case around schools, and I think it's very important to recognize and thank officers for the work that's been done on those schemes. But golly gosh, Lord Provost, what a mess this administration has created in its handling of parts of this programme in certain parts of the city. It is really because of their and this well-documented now we know best attitude that the goodwill that we did see in some of our communities at the beginning of lockdown has been truly squandered. And it has been replaced in some cases with frustration, resentment, and genuine. Now, Lord Provost, I've been involved in politics in West Edinburgh in some way, shape or form for over 20 years. I have never seen anything like the public meeting that was held in Gyle Park last month. Now, the administration can try and deflect as much as it wants to, but the truth is that that event the attendance, the anger was truly extraordinary to see. And it shouldn't just be a wake-up call for the administration, it should be a wake-up call for all of us who actually care about the health of the relationship that exists between this local authority and the people that we serve. And the frustration and the resentment that I saw in East Craigs and Craig now is being created in some other parts of the city too. Now, Lord Provost, it's important to stress this situation could have been even worse if the administration had got its way originally, because people talk about back in May. Let's go back in May and let's remember it was the original position of the administration that there wouldn't even be consultation. Their position was that ward councillors would simply be notified of the changes, and consultation, albeit limited, only came about because of a Liberal Democrat amendment. Now, I have checked the report that was before the committee back in May. That report made no mention of big schemes like low traffic neighbourhoods. There was not a single mention of these in the report that went before the committee. And yes, I voted for the short 5-day consultation process, but I did so believing that it was going to be for genuine emergency changes for things like pavement widening, temporary cycleways. It was never suggested at that meeting back in May, Lord Provost, that massive change schemes like those in East Craigs, schemes that fundamentally change the way that people move about, would be pursued through a truncated 5-day process that avoided any kind of formal public consultation. But even the consultation process that was agreed has been abused. Look at the East Craigs plan. All 3 councillors opposed. The Community Council opposed. A petition of 1,200 against. And what was the conclusion of the consultation endorsed by the leader of the council? It was full steam ahead. And for all the grumbling of the transport convener today, Lord Provost, let's be clear that it took a process outside of her cherished due process. It took many hundreds of people turning up in the park on a Friday night in the middle of a pandemic to get her to think again. Lord Provost, we need to listen to our communities. We need to listen to our constituents. And my addendum is also about listening to each other. We are all elected here to represent our communities. So what we say as ward councillors should count, not customarily dismissed, as has unfortunately been the case in a number of schemes and processes that have gone forward. And it's why we have this addendum today, designed to give more power back to us, the ward councillors, to actually influence this process and the outcome. Lord Provost, the administration has created a right royal mess with it. In its amendment today reminds me of that old joke about Brits abroad. If they don't understand you the first time, you just speak louder. Lord Provost, it's not good enough. It's time to change the approach, and I propose the Liberal Democrat addendum.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And to second the Liberal Democrat addendum, Councillor Neil Ross.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Formally.
Excellent. Well done, Councillor Ross. Councillor Mowat.
Thank you, Lord Provost. The genesis and implementation of these schemes and projects has been interesting to watch. Councillor McInnes assures us that consultation is taking place, that this is, and Councillor Doran yesterday was on the news telling us these are temporary measures, they're emergency measures, that we know they will make mistakes, but we can go back. Well, if I knew how to feed back and to get a response from officers when I've raised concerns about things which are harming the viability of businesses, I would be able to agree with those comments. Unfortunately, I cannot agree with those comments because I have such a list of outstanding requests for officers to look at schemes where they have been raised and implemented that I cannot say that this council is responding. If we are expected to wait 2 months for it to come back formally, that is not the impression that is being given. If they go in as an emergency, we should be able to respond timorously when there are problems being caused. We look back at that May report and it talks about, yes, difficult decisions will have to be made about loading, but we are supposed to be creating space, protecting the environment, the economic life of the city. If we only concentrate on those death certificates which have COVID written on them, we will miss out all the other impacts of this pandemic that are harming the lives of the residents of this city and the economic life of this city. And that is a relationship. If you harm people's economic life, you harm their health and their life as well. We won't see those results because it won't be marked, but they will bear the scars of that. And it is important that we do have an ability, and that councillors have an ability, that when members of the public come to us in good faith, that we can respond, that officers do listen, that we can get those schemes tweaked to ensure that the good intention that was made, that this was brought in with, are followed through. Because I'm afraid that faith has been seriously breached by this administration. And it is becoming harder and harder to support this project in any way, shape or form, when many of the aims are laudable. But when they have been so poorly implemented, when the response to people who need amendments made is not forthcoming, this is why there is so much opposition coming forward. So if someone could at some point please tell us how opposition councillors are supposed to raise their concerns and what the response rate is and how soon they should see that response and those KPIs, I would be very, very grateful. Because then I would know whether we were just being ignored because we're not saying the right things, which there's a lot of suspicion in this city that if you don't respond in the right way, you don't get a response yourself. Or whether there is a commitment to actually revising these plans when they create difficulties for the local population.
Thank you, Councillor Mowat. Councillor White.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Right back at the beginning of this meeting, I had a written answer from the council leader which reminded us that at the start of the Spaces for People programme, 4 out of the 5 parties agreed to the way we would go forward. Regrettably, that 4 parties pushed through and included the Lib Dems, who are making a lot of noise today, and their MSP does, rightly about consultation, but it's a bit too late, because they pushed through a system that made sure that we didn't properly scrutinise any of these Spaces for People projects. At that time, we were meeting as Policy and Sustainability every 2 weeks. We've heard about the need for speed to implement these measures, but actually we'd have been quicker doing a 2 weeks and agree and do it than we've been in getting some of the things in place that we've done. And yet the rejection of a 2-week look at committee is largely, I believe, what's wrong with the whole programme. There's 2 reasons for this. First, if you'd had it at committee, local ward members would have been able to join in and give their views on things. Second, the public and local bodies would have been able to write deputations. They maybe couldn't come in person, but they could write them. They would have voiced their view, and hopefully in an open committee in front of other people and on webcast, it would have been heard. So you would have had better decisions. And secondly, on some of the things that have been implemented, even a cursory look at the outline plans would have caused enough questions from councillors to have them altered. I think of a floating disabled parking space. I think of some of the floating bus stops. I think of some of the measures in place to extend pavements in local shopping centres, which they're not actually letting people use a wider area because there are bollards at the edge of the pavement, and all they're doing otherwise is clogging up bus lanes and pushing cyclists into the other traffic that's there. So we need to think about this in a way that allows people to have their voice heard. If I think of Links Gardens and Braid Road and Silver Nows, where there were early decisions taken, we took those supposedly for exercise. That part of the pandemic response finished months ago, yet they're still closed and no one will listen. Arguably, those TTROs are illegal because the purpose of them has gone. the need for people to exercise within a few hundred yards of their home. It's gone. It may come back, but it has gone, and it's no longer an emergency, so arguably it's illegal. And I think East Craigs has caused lots of people to cry foul the most on this. Well, let me take to that.
Okay,
Councillor Webber has reminded us that the issue, apparently, was people walking and cycling, encountering traffic when social distancing. And the council's own papers say this was a community-driven project. Well, if it was community-driven, where's the evidence for that? It wasn't that. It was dreamt up by council officers, and it's pushing things through against the view of that community. Let's listen. Let's agree the motion from Councillor Rust. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Councillor Jim Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I will be supporting the Conservative motion on this. And I have to say, Lord Provost, and I think you might have some sympathy with this view, it is rather disappointing to have carefully drafted motions dismissed in amendments or addendums with simple words like deletes all. It seems to me to represent a lack of intellectual seriousness that people are incapable of engaging with what is written in a motion and engaging with it in a meaningful way. So I do hope that councillors will think about the respect in the written word as well as in the spoken word. The Spaces for People programme is clearly in great difficulty. A programme that manages a headline in a local paper of business genocide is not the kind of programme or the kind of headline we would want as a council. I think we'd all agree. And when things aren't going right, it's sensible to stop and reflect. And to my mind, what has gone wrong is the lack of oversight and the lack of scrutiny that a committee would have provided. And it's regretful that other parties did not support these decisions coming to committee, because had they come to committee, I think we would not be in the mess we're in. Not least, we might have put a little bit more effort into getting rid of barriers at the side of pavements. We might have put a little bit more effort in providing safe routes to schools. We might have put in a little bit more...
Solutions.
Hey, hello, is that Amanda?
Hello, can whoever it is mute their microphone, please? Thank you. Apologies, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I think there are a broad spectrum of things we would all have agreed with in the Spaces for People programme. Schools, removing barriers from the side of pavements. For goodness sake, even if we could just cut back overgrown vegetation, that would be a massive step forward. And yet we've not achieved those simple things that would have united the city. Instead, we've got a large team of officers pursuing programmes that are generating a lot of local opposition. So we do have to think about that. The convener talked about us being in the pandemic response stage. I fear that this stage might go on for quite a long time. The pandemic is something we're going to have to learn to live with, I think, and that could be with us for many years. So I think we've got to begin to get back to our normal democracy. We're not going to save democracy by destroying it. And I don't think it serves any purpose when you have a large number of people from East Craigs coming out to a public meeting to then respond to that by suggesting it's an illegal gathering.
To conclusion,
much better to engage with people and change what we're doing. And I do I thank Councillor Miller for raising the issue of the large number of fellow Scots that have died during this pandemic. It is a great regret that in Scotland we have the third highest excess mortality rate in Europe. So this is a very real crisis for our country. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm of course happy to support the Spaces for People projects, of course as emergency measures to keep people safe, to promote active travel, and I think it's the right thing to do. As Councillor Miller reminded us, COVID is still killing and infecting people in our city, and we need to continue to take these precautions. Councillor Doran made it clear that we have taken time to meet with any of our key stakeholders, and in the last week or so, Councillor Doran and I have met with RNIB, Living Streets, Spokes, Guide Dogs the Blind and Lothian Buses, and will happily meet any more to hear of their concerns. They all accept that this is the way forward, and they're keen to be involved to ensure they can influence how we go forward with spaces for people and respond to the crisis. And let's be clear that we have engaged in every project as agreed by committee. Stakeholders have been engaged. As Councillor McInnes rightly stated, wherever it's possible, we will look to improve our engagement processes as we go forward. A public meeting that's been stirred up by a Lib Dem campaign is not the voice of Edinburgh. The many spaces for people projects that have been delivered all across the city are the voice of the city. Councillor Doran and Councillor McInnes accept that if we need to review and change things, that will happen, and I know they'll deliver on that promise. And if Councillor Mount has a long list, I doubt that the Director and the Convener have not acted on them if you'd bother to send them on. I'm happy to support the Administration's amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Councillor Arthur, Councillor Cook first, sorry.
Thanks, Lord Provost. I think those comments from Councillor Day, coupled with the speeches from the Convener and Vice Convener of Tech, lay bare the fundamental and ongoing issue with spaces for people. And that is that the widespread nature and anger and the level of community opposition by residents who haven't been consulted is continuing to be dismissed as party political campaigning and something stirred up by opposing political parties on the council, when in fact residents' outrage and people who vote for all parties and none is what has spurred opposition parties to take this action and seek these changes and this public engagement to the spaces for people. Lord Provost, I wish that people who are filling my inbox, and in 11 years as a campaigner in South Edinburgh, I've never seen an inbox busier as what it has been with issues on Braid Road, Petland Terrace, in Brunsfield and Morningside Road. If all those people voted Conservative, by golly, I wish they did, but I can tell you that most certainly do not. The opposition is widespread, and that's a fundamental misunderstanding from the administration on this, from SNP councillors and Labour councillors, who seem to think this is some sort of grand conspiracy against them. Is most certainly not. If Councillor McInnes thinks there are substantial changes made to Morningside Road, I'm afraid she hasn't been to it, and she's been told porky pies by some of them, I'm afraid. There may have been some tinkering at the fringes, but certainly no substantial change. Brunsfield Place, exactly the same. I was on a walkabout with an officer who came to meet with councillors and businesses in Brunsfield, and comments were to the effect that I can see why these measures aren't required here, and that did not materialise. Those promises did not materialise. It's the fundamental issue about engaging the public, and I appreciate that decisions can be difficult, but sometimes digging in is simply not the answer. This is now doing extreme reputational damage to the council. We really need to think again on this, and I support the submission by Councillor Rust.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Arthur. Councillor Arthur?
Sorry, Lord Provost, I was struggling with the mute button.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it's only one button, but it's a tricky one. So again, I find myself stuck in the middle of quite a divisive debate when really I think this is an issue we should be able to reach agreement on. I think two different cities are being described here, one where everything's perfect and one where everything's awful, whereas like most people in Edinburgh, I live in the one in the middle where some of the spaces for people things are good, like reducing the speed limit on the A702 to 30 miles per hour, and other things people want to have a more say on without a doubt. I think what's pretty clear is people do support the Spaces for People initiative, the idea behind it, the philosophy, But where it's failing, as we've heard already, is around implementation and transparency of decision making. So just a small example of what's been happening. So in my ward, we met on the 7th of August, the community councils and all the local councillors from Morningside and Fairmile Head. At that meeting, it was agreed that the A702 project shouldn't proceed until there was a meeting with residents and that a road safety audit should be undertaken before work started. So that was agreed, but then a few days later, a briefing was prepared and the project was commissioned, so against the wishes of local councillors and also the community councils. And that wasn't about wrecking it, that was about improving it. It was about engaging with people and making the argument for these schemes and also allowing local residents to have a chance to see how they thought it should be improved. 5 weeks later, national news coverage, we'll have Bob and Pat Cunningham living on Pentland Terrace, elderly couple. Pat has Parkinson's disease, and they're talking about the impact of these changes have had on their lives. The non-trivial impact. So I don't know if that meeting with residents would have changed the design or if it could be improved, but it would have gave them a say and they would have had more warning about the project heading their way. I felt ashamed. I know Bob more than Pat. They've contributed a lot to the local community, and I felt ashamed of the way they've been treated. They're good people. So the policy that we're working within here was set back in May. That was at the time when streets were full of people walking and cycling. Fantastic view. The weather was better then as well, if I remember rightly. But sadly, I mean, those walkers and cyclists, they've evaporated to some extent. Let's hope they come back. But things have changed on the ground. So I think it's right that we do look at the broad framework this policy sets within. I don't think it's right that we simply restate or reiterate a policy set back in May as being fit for purpose. I think it's right that we do reflect on it and try to look for easy ways of improving things like the consultation phase. And that's not about consulting indefinitely until everybody agrees. That's just about trying as much as possible to find easy ways of getting views on board and acting on them. Ultimately, I think, we're all here elected to reflect the views of local people, not to impose our views upon them. And so we have to be very careful. I noted earlier in the summation of the East Craig's remarks that one of the overriding concerns was that people felt that the democratic process was being undermined. And that's something that we have to take really seriously, both in this context and all others as well. Thank you, Lord Provost.
You're on mute, Lord Provost.
Yeah. Councillor Kate Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Sorry, I was also having trouble with my mute button. I wanted to contribute really just to give a slightly different perspective from some of the things that we've heard. So most of the emails, not all, but most of the emails that I've received in my inbox have been about positive engagement with the consultation. I've had quite a few emails asking me when schemes are starting because people are keen to see them implemented. And I've had some engagement asking for schemes to go further than they do at the moment. There's been a huge amount of support that I've seen for the intent behind Spaces for People and actually a lot of very positive engagement with the detail. And as has been said, we are very much still in a pandemic. We still need to social distance while out walking. Many people are still avoiding public transport. And these are emergency measures to support travel around our local communities, something that we're doing because actually if we are living and working in a much smaller community in a smaller area, then we have less chance of spreading the virus and spreading the infection. So there is still very much a public health reason for these measures. I think Councillor Mayne made the point much earlier, because obviously we have discussed Spaces for People at quite a few junctures in this fairly lengthy committee. I think Councillor Mayne made the point very well earlier. We need to have a grown-up conversation, and actually as councillors, we have a responsibility to help and support engagement with residents about how to implement spaces for people in a way that works for communities, not to whip up a frenzy with phrases like business genocide, especially when that comes from a councillor who's asked for respect in the written and spoken word. Actually, we've had reports detailing the additional measures for walking and cycling and how they can support local high streets, how they can increase footfall. And a large focus of the work has been about supporting businesses with outdoor space for queuing and for tables and chairs. And I wanted to pick up finally on the points about democracy, because local ward members can give our views. We're sent emails of the proposals and we're given an opportunity to raise concerns. And that's something that I hope all ward members are doing, but I certainly am doing. And councillors McInnes and Doran have agreed to bring a report to committee to look at the processes, to reflect on the processes and see where improvements can be made. But I think the key issue is that Spaces for People is actually hugely supported by many people across the city. And it's something that we must continue with, because there's a public health emergency, and it's about well-being and about keeping people healthy and about preventing the spread of infection in our city. So I fully support the coalition amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Lord Provost. You know, it's a real shame that on something like this, I mean, the previous motion, we agreed unanimously, again, on something quite important, not just to the water of, you know, area near the Water of Leith, but to the whole city. In all my time in Edinburgh, on and off the council, transport is always a highly controversial subject. It's one of the services that everybody relies on, no matter whether you're at school, not at school, what age you are, what mobility you are. We all rely on transport. And as our city has grown, and particularly in the times of economic success, that has put a lot of pressure on our transport infrastructure. Now, of course, as other colleagues have said, we're seeing the impact of the pandemic and having to react to that with emergency powers, etc. However, and I mean, you know, Councillor Campbell immediately before me said, you know, and I agree with her, we've got to engage with residents in a way that's respectful to them. I totally agree. And I think that, you know, I think there's two things about this. I think there's concern around the proposals, and you'll always get people opposing changes to transport. You know, you will always get that. But I think what's an issue for a lot of people in the city, and certainly in my own ward, is how we go about engaging and not taking on board. You know, it's okay to carry on with the programme, as Councillor Kate Campbell has said, but that doesn't stop us pausing, reflecting, and it seems to me that we've missed an opportunity to really engage positively and properly and proactively by not having a consultation at the start. And I worry about that, and I hope that, you know, and I'm concerned also that we're having to wait until November for something to come back to committee. At the end of the day, we're all democratically elected. Officers work for all of the council, and I do think, not just in relation to this particular portfolio or service, but I do think that elected members, particularly if it's a local ward issue, we're not kept informed or given the tools that we need to engage our own community councils and constituents as early as we ought to be and as informed as we ought to be. That's been my experience so far, but I hope we can continue the programme, and I hope we can salvage the reputation and support for the measures that make this city more pleasant to get around. Let's remember, not everybody can walk, wheel and cycle as well. I say that with my Equalities working group hat on. Thank you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Staniforth.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Lord Provost, the argument has been made that mitigation for the spread of COVID will cause economic damage. And I'm sure for some of the measures that is true. I fully expect that we will see an economic downturn, but the evidence just doesn't bear that up for the mitigation that Spaces for People represents. Study after study after study has shown that measures that benefit pedestrians and cyclists benefit the economy, and especially benefit the kind of small businesses that we should be looking to preserve despite COVID. And so rather than a business genocide, which is an incredibly tasteless phrase, by the way, the spaces for people mitigation actually represents a likely business lifeline. I wouldn't be surprised to learn in 10 years' time that some businesses are still here because of the extra footfall, pedestrianisation and extra cycleways gave them. The truth is, it is dedicating cities to cars that rips the heart out of the small high streets outside the city centre. And these measures will put that heart back in. This is a business lifeline. And that is why I will be very happy to support the joint Green and Coalition amendment, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Standiforth. Councillor McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. It was really to come in again on the nature of the scheme. During this meeting, I've personally agreed Councillor Rossi's request to go and meet businesses and talk about that scheme in particular. There have been other conversations going on about other major schemes, East Craigs being one which will go to committee in just a matter of almost days now in early October to work out how that is taken forward, and that will be for committee. I did want to emphasise two things. One, the nature of where we are and the evolving nature of where we are, both in terms of additional restrictions, which may end up subject to Edinburgh, or Edinburgh subject to as we go through, particularly into winter, and also the evolution of control of COVID. Nobody is expecting in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, in the next any number of weeks, for offices to suddenly reopen and for everything in our society and city to spring back to normal. We are going to be living with the difficulties and consequences of COVID for a significant period of additional time. And so the evolving nature that we're dealing with in terms of the external circumstances have to be matched by our own willingness to change. And I don't see anything in the administration amendment or indeed in the Green amendment which dismisses any of the concerns raised by individuals across the city. That is how it is being portrayed by some people for political gain. That is not our position. Our position very clearly articulates the concerns that are being raised by individuals and businesses, and I think shows a constructive way of engaging and trying to work through those issues. I think the Green position similarly does the same. The how we get to the outcome of this is going to change. We are going to be reviewing the schemes, as Councillor White was mentioning, the Links Garden scheme in my own ward in Leith. This scheme will be reviewed, and all schemes will have to be reviewed as the circumstances change. That is important. It's important to see whether, one, in the short term, they're still needed. In the medium term, do they want to be retained? Do they have to be changed if they are going to be retained? All of these questions are things we have to ask ourselves and ask ourselves continually. This process, and I said this in a previous debate, is not an event. These are not permanent schemes which are being implemented and then left to their own accord and the team are moving on to something else. This is an evolving picture dealing with the city as it is now and as it will be going forward in the next few weeks and months. So are these permanent schemes? No. Are they permanent in their design when they're implemented? No. Sometimes, actually, when you look at schemes like Great Junction Street, again in my own ward, what the officers have done is created additional space for pedestrians so that there is additional passing place, for example, for pedestrians, where that's a major concern. So able-bodied people like me can get out of the way of people who might not be so able-bodied, and there's enough space to do that without being pushed into the road. But that, again, will be changed and evolved and strengthened going forward. So I did want to emphasise again that nobody is dismissing concerns that are being raised, and nobody is saying these are permanent schemes for the long term. They are not.
Thank you, Councillor McVeigh. Councillor Doggett.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Some of the comments that have been made I agree with, and some have puzzled me. Councillor Doran referenced the fact that this is democracy, and one of the elements of democracy that you also have accountability. And it's quite frustrating sometimes that when you make a comment that is not positive, you're accused of having a combative tone. That does not help debate, and that does not help democracy just because you disagree. And just because you can put your argument forward with strong words. Concerns, what concerns do I have, particularly in respect of Comiston Road and Braid Road? We raised a concern with officers in respect of the City Car Club and the disabled parking bay on Comiston Road. Now, remember, as Councillor Arthur said, there's not been a road safety audit taking place. The response I got said, despite the concerns, which we recognise, we really need to see the whole design implemented and then examine how it is working from a safety point of view. Now, that was an official response from an officer. We will need to see how it is working from a safety point of view without having conducted a road safety audit. I find that incredulous, and I find that dangerous. And if Spaces for People is designed to protect the people of the city, to give them more space for walking, responses like that do not fill me with any confidence. Lord Provost, we've had lots of comments about jigsaw pieces, but sometimes we have to recognise that perhaps we've picked up the wrong piece, that it doesn't fit into the puzzle. And perhaps sometimes the piece that we're trying to fit into the puzzle might come from another jigsaw, because that is definitely the case from what we've seen in Comiston Road and with Braid Road. Businesses need assistance. Some businesses just need a loading space so that they can carry on with their activity. What we've seen so far is a refusal to recognise any of those needs that businesses have. I'm not going to say anything more because we'll continue this debate ad infinitum, but it's absolutely important, essential, that comments from residents are taken on board. And the reality from what we've seen is that they haven't. Concerns have been dismissed by officers, and it's been officers who've dismissed them. And we've seen nothing in the proposals that have been approved by the council leader, the deputy leader, who I do not believe is the voice for Edinburgh, given the performance of his party. And these proposals are approved with no changes. And that is frustrating and worrying. I will support Councillor Rust's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Doggett. Councillor McNeese-Meekin.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm kind of concerned. I think that we've heard a lot about not listening to communities. On the other hand, we've heard a lot of how exactly that very thing has happened. But I think there's something else that I would like to point out to colleagues, which is the overall view. One of our duties is certainly to listen to and represent our communities. But another is to inform ourselves with the best international research, the best scientific research. And those tell us that, in fact, when people walk and cycle more, they stop in local shops and spend more money. Okay, so that's what the evidence shows. The evidence also shows that where we're ignoring medical advice, we are seeing resurgence of this awful disease. And yes, I think all of us are aware of the economic impact, but to compare that to the loss that families have suffered through the death of loved ones, or to compare that to the ongoing illnesses suffered by those who've, as it were, recovered or survived, but have ongoing serious health issues, I think is not helpful to any of our residents. And that's just what I wanted to say.
Oops, Councillor Aldridge. Councillor Aldridge?
Yeah, sorry, I had the double mute problem as well.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks. Yes, I just felt I needed to come in after the council leader, because I think one of the reasons that there is anger and confusion in communities is when people say one thing in one meeting and another thing in another meeting. Because we heard at a previous meeting the council leader say quite clearly that the East Craigs proposals would be made permanent as quickly as possible. In the leaflet that went out, it said it is planned that the scheme will be proposed for permanent implementation in late 2020. Now, today, the council leader has said...
Excuse me, Councillor Aldridge. Can everybody please mute? Apologies, Councillor Aldridge.
Thanks, Lord Provost. But today the council leader said these are not intended to be permanent. Now, he either was right at the last meeting where he said they would be permanent, or he was right at this meeting where he said that they weren't. But both cannot be true at the same time. And we've had similar issues with the transport convener, who has said that both that the proposals are urgent to do with COVID and that they're not particularly urgent because they're to do with implementing the West Edinburgh link, which is a much broader strategic transport objective. And we've also heard that local members have a say, but then when local members have a say, they are ignored. So we have these two totally different ways of working, time and time again. And it's little wonder that there is anger, frustration, and no confidence in the processes of this council. So my view is that we could make a massive change for people who want to exercise, who want to move about the city safely, by making small changes that make big differences rather than trying to focus on huge changes that make very little difference. So it is the cutting back the vegetation and so on, which will make a huge difference to cyclists and pedestrians and people in wheelchairs. And I think finally, to insult and patronise local people who have come together in large numbers by pretending they have been in some way duped by one political party or another is a complete insult to their intelligence. The community in Craigmount, North Gyle and East Craigs have largely self-promoted their own views. They have come up with constructive suggestions which have been ignored until now. And I'm glad there's some movement just now, but it's too little, it's too late, and the confidence in this council is at rock bottom. So I do hope that the administration will take some cognizance of the damage they are doing to the reputation of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Aldridge. Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Provost. So as under item 9.3, I will reiterate that I have done absolutely everything that I possibly can to work with all councillors and all interest groups in my ward. Now, I have had the opportunity to feedback extensively about things. Comiston, a case in point, where I very much said that the traffic situation on Comiston will be affected by public transport, and there were really massive changes made to that. Once, I'd spoken about that, and we got into consultation with Lothian Buses, put in bus gates, they put in bus lanes, they investigated reasons why early on the buses were not running to time. They made changes. I had concerns from constituents about them not being able to get in and out of their driveways with the cycle wands. These have been reviewed. There's still a couple of tweaks needed. And these are just some examples. So I feel that I am allowed to feed in. I feel that I am listened to. I feel that it has to be in proportion. Everybody can't get everything that they're asking for, because in that case everybody would be asking for the same things, which we're not. So there has to be a balance to it. You have to justify what you're asking for, and it has to be fair and reasonable and proportionate. And when you do that and work constructively with the teams, you make progress. You can't get everything that you want done right away because there's a limited capacity for making these changes. And if you just keep shouting the same
thing over and over as they try to steadily progress their way through it will not get anywhere. But I have found that engaging constructively, being very clear about what it is you're asking for and why you're asking for it, gets results. And I fully intend to continue doing that. And hopefully we will make a way forward through this where most of the people get most of what they want. But everybody can't have everything that they want. And it doesn't matter how loud you shout or how much you consult, there'll be people that are pleased and there are people that will not be so pleased. And that's the way it is. So I would just encourage everybody to work constructively, to take a breath and start again and engage with the opportunities that you're getting offered to engage. And for that reason, I'll be supporting the amendment. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Watt. I have no other contributions, so Councillor Rust, right for reply.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I'll say at the outset, I'm very pleased to accept the Liberal Democrat addendum. I think it's sensible and constructive. I think Councillor Lang made the point well that we're really at a wake-up call for relations between the Council and people living here. I think Councillor Aldridge caught some of the anger and frustration from certainly his neck of the woods in terms of the way this project's gone to date. I don't recognise Councillor Doran's comments. She may want to ask Councillor Arthur to share some of the wardy emails that we've been receiving. The motion, as we said before, was about bringing people and communities with the Council. It's about enabling participation. As Councillor Marriott made the point, councillors cannot even get responses at times, so it makes it very difficult to support the project and all aspects of the project. It's not community driven, as Councillor White said. The Council, I think, to my mind, seems out of touch. They don't like the scrutiny or engagement. Councillor Cook was quite right to say it's a fundamental mistake to assume this is some sort of party campaign. I think Councillor Arthur got it when he said it's about the democratic process being undermined when you don't bring people with you. And in terms of Councillor Kate Campbell's comments about a grown-up conversation, I think many councillors and communities would actually just like to have the conversation and would like to be listened to. And I agree with Councillor Cameron's sentiments about engagement and the fact that November seems a very far away time for the meeting. The administration amendment sums up, I think, their high-handed approach. It actually calls, I've seen over the years many calls for reports from the Council, but it was one of the first times I've actually seen a call for a short report, which is obviously begrudgingly being brought forward. So I am very happy to move the Conservative motion with the Lib Dem addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rust. Gavin, to the vote.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. So we have a coalition, a motion by Councillor Rust, seconded by Councillor Webber, with the addition of the Liberal Democrat addendum, moved by Councillor Lang, seconded by Councillor Neil Ross. And we have a coalition amendment moved by Councillor McInnes, seconded by Councillor Doran, and a Green amendment moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Corbett, and I believe those two are combining into one amendment. So we will take it as a roll call vote as usual. So we have the motion by Councillor Rust with the Lib Dem addendum and the amendment of the coalition and the Green combined. Lord Provost.
Amendment.
Councillor Aldridge.
For the motion.
Councillor Arthur. Councillor Arthur. We'll come back. Councillor Barry. Councillor Barry.
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Amendment.
Councillor Booth.
Amendment.
Councillor Bridgman.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Motion, please.
Councillor Bruce.
Motion.
Councillor Burgess.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Cameron. Councillor Cameron. Come back for Councillor Cameron. Councillor Jim Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Kate Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Mary Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Child.
Amendment.
Councillor Cook.
The motion.
Councillor Corbett.
Amendment.
Councillor Day.
Amendment.
Councillor Dickey.
Amendment.
Councillor Dixon.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Doggett.
Motion.
Councillor Doran.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Douglas.
Motion.
Councillor Fullerton.
Amendment.
Councillor Gardner.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Goyer.
Motion.
Councillor Gordon.
Amendment.
Councillor Henderson.
Amendment.
Councillor Howie.
Amendment.
Councillor Hutchison has indicated motion. So Councillor Johnson.
Motion.
Councillor Key.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Laidlaw.
Motion, please.
Councillor Lang.
For the motion.
Councillor McInnes.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Main.
Amendment, please.
Councillor McClellan.
Motion.
Councillor McNeice Meakin.
Amendment, please.
Councillor McVeigh.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Miller.
Amendment.
Councillor Mitchell.
For the motion, please.
Councillor Mowat.
Motion, please.
Councillor Munn.
Amendment.
Councillor Munro.
Amendment.
Councillor Osler.
Motion, please.
Councillor Perry.
Councillor Perry's internet service has gone down and he doesn't seem to have your number, Gavin. But I'll give it to him if you don't mind waiting.
Not at all, thank you. Councillor Ray.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Rose.
Motion.
Councillor Neil Ross.
Motion, Gavin, please.
Councillor Rust.
Motion.
Councillor Smith.
Motion, please.
Councillor Staniforth. Councillor Staniforth.
Sorry, I did unmute myself. Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Webber.
Motion, please.
Councillor White.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Work.
Amendment.
Councillor Young has indicated voting for the motion. Right, we'll go back. Councillor Arthur.
I'm in the huff again. I won't be voting on this one, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Hello, Gavin. Regretfully, I'm going to have to abstain on this. I really am. I'm sorry, but I can't support.
Thank you. And Councillor Perry has indicated the amendment. I'm just checking. I've got everyone. I think I've got everyone there. So it's 25 votes for the motion, 31 for the amendment. The amendment is carried. Then that takes us to 9.9, as 9.8 has been withdrawn. 9.9 is a motion by Councillor Booth on homeless households in unsuitable accommodation. And we have a coalition amendment and a Liberal Democrat amendment.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Can I start by saying that I'm happy to accept the administration amendment, which agrees the main action point in my motion with a perhaps more realistic timetable. I would encourage the Lib Dems to withdraw their amendment, since their amendment seems to do largely the same thing as the administration. Lord Provost, the problem of unsuitable accommodation for people who are homeless is not a new one. It has been known for some time that bed and breakfasts, in particular, do not allow homeless people the flexibility to cook their own meals, usually do not have laundry facilities, can often be cramped and unsuitable and can have a significant negative impact on the physical and mental health of homeless people. And the unsuitable accommodation order states that 7 days is the limit of time that homeless people should be in such poor quality accommodation. Prior to May of this year, it applied to homeless households with children and pregnant women, and it now applies to all homeless households, although there is a coronavirus-related extension to give local authorities more time to comply, which was initially the end of September and has now been further extended to January 2021. It's deeply regrettable that the Scottish Government is not being clear and consistent with local authorities on this issue of the extension. And we in Edinburgh should be clear that all homeless people should have suitable accommodation, and we should set a clear date to achieve that. And of course, bed and breakfasts are also the most expensive form of temporary accommodation, so it's directly in the Council's interest to phase out the use of unsuitable accommodation as soon as possible. I acknowledge that the Council has been working towards this, and that the very high cost of accommodation in Edinburgh and the shortage of housing, which is exacerbated by the significant number of short-term holiday lets, make the situation in Edinburgh extremely challenging. But working towards this is not enough. We need to ensure that Edinburgh is not breaking the law. We need to ensure that all homeless people have suitable accommodation that supports their physical and mental health. And we need a costed action plan that ensures we deliver that. The problem is far worse in Edinburgh than in the rest of Scotland. In the latest period in which figures are available, the first quarter of 2020, Edinburgh accounted for 100 of the 120 Scotland-wide breaches of the order. More than 80% of the national breaches are in the capital. That can't be acceptable. We have to have decent accommodation for homeless people, and for that reason, I move the Green motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. And to second the Green motion?
Thank you, Lord Provost. Formally.
Excellent, thank you. To move the amendment by the Coalition, Councillor Kate Campbell.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Temporary accommodation is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a local authority. The gap between housing need and housing supply this year is over 4,600 households. The need for temporary accommodation, unfortunately, continues to grow, and at its heart, the solution is about permanent, settled, move-on accommodation. Now, obviously, the key to that is our house building programme, the largest council house building programme in Scotland. It's about having the highest percentage of council lets to homeless households, the highest percentage of any local authority. It's about finding alternative routes out of homelessness through the private rented sector and through improved pathways and access to mid-market rents. And it's about the short-term lets legislation that was discussed earlier that we have fought so hard for, that should ease pressure on housing supply and housing costs. And it's about having the processes in place through our rent deposit scheme and through our private rented sector team to support households to access and maintain tenancies in the private rented sector. It's also hugely about prevention, and that's why in our rapid rehousing transition plan that will be discussed tomorrow at committee, we've got a proposal for a multidisciplinary team to identify and work intensively with households at risk of homelessness. And all of these things will help, but the challenge is enormous. We've got the lowest levels of social rent, only 15% of social homes in the city compared to a Scottish average of 24, and the highest rents in Scotland. But I think it's important that we also reflect on what we have done already. Collectively, we all agreed to invest £500,000 improving and transforming B&B, so providing access to kitchens, food storage and washing machine. As Councillor Booth rightly pointed out, things that really do make a big difference to people's quality of life. But alongside this, because that is not a permanent solution, alongside this we've increased temporary furnished flats. These were up to over 1,000 before lockdown, and actually since lockdown we've secured an additional 200 properties. We've invested in PSL again to increase temporary furnished flats. We've developed home share, so shared temporary tenancies, which have been hugely successful and popular. And we are leading the way on rapid access accommodation. That is providing a pathway to more settled accommodation for people with multiple and complex needs. And again, tomorrow we'll be discussing proposals for psychologists in hostels. So that's about specialist clinical support for those who need it. We need to continue expanding suitable temporary accommodation, and we need to keep innovating so that we are providing the right type of accommodation to meet people's needs. But as I've outlined, it is very complex. There is not one solution, but many actions that we have to take. And I believe that committee is the best place to have these detailed and complex discussions. And while I have some sympathy with Councillor Lang's amendment, I'm moving the coalition amendment because I think actually, rather than discussing a motion, we need to have a report that sets out the detail of the legislation and the detail of our approach to meeting it. And that will allow us to have a discussion amongst councillors, but also to involve officers in that conversation to be able to ask questions and make sure that we are getting all of the information. The legislation on unsuitable accommodation orders will be challenging, particularly for Edinburgh, but our intention is to comply as quickly as we can. And I think a report to committee and then that discussion will allow us to collectively move towards a solution. So I'm very happy to move the coalition amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. To second the amendment, Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Provost. I'll not list again everything that Councillor Kate Campbell has just enumerated, the many initiatives that are underway. What I will do is take this opportunity to thank all the officers and staff who have been involved in that Herculean task and who do not get daunted by the scale of the challenge that's facing them. It is huge, and they just try every day in every way, and in fact some of them overnight, not just during the day, to make a difference and to chart a better path and a better way forward, not for homeless people as an amorphous lump, but for each individual family and person who comes to us for help. That is, the scale of the challenge is enormous. If anybody's up to it, it's the team that we have. Their dedication's extraordinary. It'll be an absolute opportunity for us to have this report. It may not make happy reading, but it lets us really look at this, really begin to tackle things, and whilst we put in place so many initiatives, ideas, we're always open to more, and we as a council and everybody that's involved will keep pushing to do more, and that's why I'm looking forward to having this report and having this discussion. Thank you, Provost.
To move the amendment by the Liberal Democrat group, Councillor Lang.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Provost. I agreed with every single thing that Councillor Booth said, but I apologise to him for really getting all processy here, because I am finding this a rather bizarre situation, to be honest. We have a motion before us today about the Council's Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan. We have a special meeting of the Housing Committee tomorrow. In fact, I think it's about 14 hours from now, 16 hours from now, with the single sole dedicated purpose of considering the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan. It was made clear at the last Housing Committee on the 3rd of September that there was going to be a special meeting to consider that plan. So it wasn't any great secret, it wasn't any great surprise. We've got a detailed and dedicated meeting tomorrow where we can question officers, where we can discuss these issues in depth, and so I just genuinely do not understand why we are not considering these issues as part of that meeting. And so I have a lot of sympathy with the content of the motion, and I've said that to Councillor Booth before. I would have equal sympathy with the timing of it if we were looking at a long potential delay of months until the next committee, but we're not. We have a committee which looks at this stuff. It's the Housing Committee. That's what it's there for. It's meeting tomorrow, so I think it's right that we consider this conversation there. Otherwise, what's the point of having a Housing Committee? So I move my amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And to second the amendment, Councillor Aldridge.
Yes, thanks, Lord Provost. I can't imagine that if it had been any party other than the Greens that had put forward this, that it wouldn't have been taken straight to the meeting tomorrow. I think the administration is showing the Greens a remarkable amount of latitude. But if there is a meeting specifically on the topic the next day, it seems pretty ridiculous to me to put off having the discussion about Councillor Booth's motion until another meeting a bit later on. Why not do it quickly and tomorrow? And for that reason, I'm happy to support the Liberal Democrat amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Aldridge. I have no members indicating they wish to speak to this, so Councillor Booth.
Thank you, Lord Provost. I'm extremely grateful to all of the councillors who have spoken, and I'm particularly glad to hear that Kevin Lang agrees with pretty much everything that I've said. But I'm a bit disappointed that he seems to be wanting to snatch a division from the jaws of consensus on this. We have an agreement. We need action on this. The convener is completely right that the best way to move forward and to agree a way forward is with a report in front of us. So I think that the administration amendment is extremely helpful in that regard. So I'm happy to continue, Lord Provost, to press my motion with accepting the administration amendment from Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Gavin, to the vote.
Thank you, Lord Provost. So we have a motion by Councillor Booth, seconded by Councillor Miller, that accepts the coalition amendment moved by Councillor Kate Campbell, seconded by Councillor Watt. And we have a Liberal Democrat amendment moved by Councillor Lang, seconded by Councillor Aldridge. As normal, we'll have a roll call vote. Lord Provost.
Motion.
Councillor Aldridge.
Amendment.
Councillor Arthur.
Motion.
Councillor Barry.
Amendment.
Councillor Bird.
Motion.
Councillor Booth.
Motion.
Councillor Bridgman.
Amendment.
Councillor Brown.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Bruce.
Amendment.
Councillor Burgess.
Motion, please.
Councillor Cameron.
Motion.
Councillor Jim Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Kate Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Mary Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Child.
Motion.
Councillor Cook.
Amendment.
Councillor Corbett.
Owing to his work at Shelter, Councillor Corbett feels his interests are too great to vote on this one.
Thank you for that. Councillor Day.
Motion.
Councillor Dickey.
Motion.
Councillor Dixon.
Motion, please.
Councillor Doggett.
Amendment.
Councillor Doran.
Motion.
Councillor Douglas. Councillor Douglas. Come back to Councillor Douglas. Councillor Fullerton. Councillor Fullerton. Councillor Gardner.
For the motion, please.
Councillor Gloyer.
The amendment, please.
Councillor Gordon.
The motion, please, Gavin.
Councillor Henderson.
Motion.
Councillor Howie.
Motion.
Councillor Hutchison. Not sure if he's managed to get back on. Councillor Johnson.
Amendment.
Councillor Key.
Motion, please.
Councillor Laidlaw.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Lang. Councillor Lang.
Sorry, the amendment, please. Apologies.
From Councillor McInnes.
Motion.
Councillor Main.
Motion, please.
Councillor McClellan.
Amendment.
Councillor McNeice Meakin.
Motion.
Councillor McVeigh.
Motion.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Mitchell.
The amendment.
Councillor Mowat.
Amendment.
Councillor Munn.
Motion.
Councillor Munro.
Motion.
Councillor Osler.
Amendment, please, Gavin.
Me next, I think.
Councillor Perry.
Motion.
Councillor Ray.
Motion, please.
Councillor Rose.
Amendment.
Councillor Neil Ross.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Rust.
Amendment.
Councillor Smith.
Amendment, please.
Councillor Staniforth.
Motion.
Councillor Watt.
Motion, please, Gavin.
Councillor Webber.
Amendment, please.
Councillor White.
Amendment.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion, please.
Councillor Work.
Motion.
Councillor Young. If Councillor Young.
Hello? Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just have a cursory look at my phone to see who's voted by text message. Councillor Douglas has, and he's voted for the amendment. And if I just go back, I suppose it's just to check whether we have Councillor Fullerton or Councillor Hutchison.
Hello, Gavin. Sorry, I missed what the vote was.
What we've got is a motion by Councillor Booth which accepts the coalition amendment as the motion, and a Liberal Democrat amendment as the amendment.
It'll be the motion then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got nothing from Councillor Hutchison. No, nothing from him on text either. So that's 32 votes for the motion, 24 for the amendment. The motion is carried.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. That leaves us with the two emergency motions to discuss. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we would have a recess immediately before that because at least one of them came in late, and I do know there are some discussions going on. So we'll have a 30-minute recess just now, and we will reassemble at 5:30. Thank you. In a position to recommence battle?
Not quite yet. We're just getting confirmation.
Okie dokie.
Battle. So that's how to describe consensus, is it?